So I think someone kick it off.
Yes, good afternoon. I am Leon van Wyk, a member of this committee. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, I'm
Good afternoon, Dave Bryant, member of the committee.
I'm Thomas Walters, member of the committee.
Good afternoon, Wendy Kaiser-Philander, committee member.
Good afternoon, Donita Stevens. I'm a member.
Good afternoon, Peter Johnson, alternate member of this committee.
Good afternoon, Gillian Bosman, a member of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament.
Okay, I think that's all the members who are present. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Mr. Procedural Officer, I have received notice of the Honourable Heron sending apologies. Have you received any other apologies?
No, Chairperson, that's the only one so far.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so today we are getting a presentation from the IEC. As this committee does get reports and presentations from Section 9 institutions. You're very welcome here, Mr. Hendricks. I think we're very interested in what you are going to be telling us about the elections. I see there was previously an engagement with the IEC, a couple of engagements about election readiness prior to the elections. So what I am going to please ask you to do is to go ahead with the presentation. If everybody else can please stay muted until Mr. Hendricks has finished the presentation, and then we can go through our questions. Just bear in mind that we are not here to prosecute or inquire into any pending matters that are outstanding with the IEC. It is to get an overview in general of the process. Thank you very much. Mr. Hendricks, over to you.
Good afternoon. I hope you can see me or hear me, Chairperson.
Very clearly, thank you.
Okie dokie. So thank you very much, Chairperson, for the opportunity to engage with the committee. I think this is the first opportunity that I have to engage with the present committee of this administration. I previously had the opportunity, I think the last time was in March of this year, just prior to the elections, where I had that particular opportunity to engage with you. I'm just trying to drive this presentation now. Let me just see if I can get it up. Can I just ask the secretary, am I allowed to share or am I driving this presentation? If I can just ask the team.
Mr. Matthews, do you want to just help him here?
Chair, just confirmation from the members if they can see it, because I am flighting it at the moment. So if Mr. Hendricks could just queue for me to change the slide. I'm hoping that members can see the presentation.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, dokie. All right, then that's fine. Thank you very much, and also thank you to the members of the committee. As I indicated to the committee secretary just at the outset, the IEC has not finalized its closeout report. When I say the IEC, I'm talking about the Electoral Commission. Because there are still a number of court cases that are still pending with regard to the national and provincial elections, where the relief being sought relates to declaring the elections basically null and void, etc. So, but I'm aware my national office has informed me that they are busy finalizing that particular report so that they can also then go to the National Assembly as required by law. So will you please bear with me, and therefore it is really just a reflection on the elections. and what has gone, and how we are going forward in terms of our preparations for the national, I'm sorry, for the local government elections. Thank you very much. So the idea is not to relitigate or review objections that were lodged through this. There was a process and a court process in regard to that. So the purpose is not for me to engage with regard to the merits or demerits of objections that were lodged during the NPE as well. Thank you very much. If you can move on, Mr. Matthews. Yep. So really, again, this is just a summary for the purposes of this presentation. And again, really, when I do refer to political parties or figures, they are really sometimes just illustrative for the purpose of reflecting on examples as the case may be. Thank you very much. So my presentation will really just cover, as part of a discussion, the voters' roll, where we were at, obviously the 3 ballots, our contestants, special votes, voting day, our staffing and outreach, and then I sort of highlighted some discussion points that I will cover as well. Thank you. So overall, in terms of our voters' roll for the national and provincial elections, we had 3.3 million, 3.317. 072. This is the highest number of voters we've ever had registered within this province. And it's largely basically to do with the fact that we not only allowed for registration weekends, typically, but we also had the facility for online registration, which allowed those persons who couldn't make to our voting stations or registration stations the opportunity to also register or even just re-register. So that is the overall sense of where we are at. If you look at this particular slide, it also gives you a breakdown of where we are in terms of the overall breakdown in terms of age, etc. I must add that if I did a cursory sort of overview of our voters' roll, and about 47% of our voters in this province were born 1980 or thereafter. So that creates also an interesting demographic data set in terms of who is, what is our makeup of our province. We use this breakdown, and I just advise members, this is the breakdown that we currently use. I know that there's always sometimes different categorizations. For example, in some cases, people would say, yeah, but youth is 35 and under. So we literally just go through a 10-year age cycle to give you an idea of where we are at overall in terms of the breakdown of our young people. Again, as you could see, members, that obviously the metro makes up the bulk of our voter registration in our province as well. Interesting to note also, members, if you compare our total number of voters registered against the voting age population, which is in the census. So in other words, we don't typically just look at the total census figures, but rather who, according to Stats SA, are 18 years and above. In other words, those who would be voting age population, and there's about 5 million odd voting age population. So overall, we are close to 66% of our voters who are registered are part of the voting age population within our particular province. Thank you very much. You can move on. Again, for the first time, we had 3 ballot papers, and this is essentially how the ballot papers presented themselves based on the number of political parties that were contesting the elections. It was also the fact that we had independents contesting this election for the first time. In our province, we only had an independent standing for the region to national. We did not have any independents contesting our elections for the provincial legislature, for your legislature. The other aspect was the fact that for our national ballot paper, given the number of political parties, we actually had to revert to a 2-column ballot paper in terms of to allow and to accommodate the large number of political parties. Now, this became quite a focus for us in terms of our communications, where we went out to go and ensure that our voters understood the fact that they will be given 3 ballot papers. Now, for those members who will recall, During local government elections, if you are residing outside of the metro, they too will receive 3 ballot papers, a ward, a PR for the local and for the district. So generally outside of the metro, voters sort of knew about the fact that you could get 3 ballot papers. In the metro, for local government elections, it is 2 ballot papers. But that just gives you some context in terms of our ballot paper process, where it is. Then can we move on? Sorry, before I do that, just one reference. The HSRC did a survey where they interviewed voters on election day in terms of a number of questions and issues that they asked. And one of the issues was around could you find your party or choice of candidate easily on? And the overwhelming majority of them actually said yes, they could actually find their party on the ballot paper. So notwithstanding the fact that we had 3, just based on that particular survey, and the survey is available on the HSRC website for those members who are interested. Yeah, so that is just an interesting outcome of their survey that they conducted. Again, just an overview in terms of our political parties and candidates who were contesting. For the national PR ballot, we had 52 parties contesting with a total number of 4,274 candidates contesting for those 200 seats. In the case of our Western Cape regional ballot, there were 34 parties and 1 independent candidate that was contesting. In other words, that was on our ballot paper. And that was 455 candidates who were then vying for the 24 seats reserved for the Western Cape region in the National Assembly. When it comes to our provincial legislature, we had 29 parties, and as I indicated, there were no independents contesting in our case. There were a total of 692 contesting for the 42 seats in the legislature. That makes for some serious competition. But yeah, so that is something which obviously has come through. Again, when it comes to the candidates and parties, I think overall, yeah, we could manage in terms of the ballot paper size for our, as it relates to our province. Thank you very much. The results. 1.968 million, 263 million votes were cast for the provincial legislature ballot. That converts into just under 60%, 59.79% turnout. There was 14,874 spoiled ballots, which is less than 1%. Now, I think the international standard, or if you want to put it as a standard, when it comes to spoiled ballots, and when do you start saying, but this is now a serious indicator of why people are spoiling ballots, or for whatever reason not understanding, is I think about 1.5%. So we're well under that, but it still means that there were 14,874 spoiled ballots. In the case of our regional ballot, the turnout was 59.59%, which is slightly less for the provincial ballot. And then you had 14,037, again 0.71%. Now, the interesting thing with regard to spoiled ballots is that in our case, the cause of the spoiled ballot is not recorded. In other words, a ballot is recorded as being spoiled either because there is no mark on the ballot, or the voter made more than one mark, or the voter in some way identified him or her or theirself on the ballot, etc. So there's a number, or simply may have been scratched through all of it and wrote all of the above. So for our purposes and in terms of the legislation, there is no declassification, or if you want to, I don't know what is a good word to use, to determine, in terms of that spoiled ballot, how people would have either not wanted to, or deliberately spoiled, or simply making a mistake, or making a choice, which 2 or more choices, as the case may be. But yeah, so it's just something to bear in mind when one looks at spoiled ballot papers and what they mean or do not mean in terms of our analysis of how people voted, etc. Thank you very much. Now, in terms of the special voting, the dates for applications for special votes was between the 15th and the 3rd of May this year, and citizens could either apply for a home visit or a voting station visit. In terms of this, I only reflect here in terms of the applications within the province, which is 135,716, and there were 94,851 ballots cast. I have not included the issue of the persons who are outside of the country. As you know, there's opportunity for somebody who is resident out of the country to register against the out of country voters roll. Essentially, they're not so much a special vote, but rather they vote on days designated for overseas voting. The only other situation is where a South African who is outside, who's going to be outside of the country, notifies us. Again, it's not so much a special vote, but rather a notification that I will be at a particular I want to vote at a particular embassy because I'll be in that country on the overseas voting day, and they vote. So this information reflects only what happened within the Western Cape in terms of applications received and the number of persons who made use of the opportunity to then cast a special vote. It could have been a home visit or a voting station visit. Thank you. Section 24A, prior notification. Now, members, you'll recall that prior to 2021, when it comes to national and provincial elections, a voter could simply arrive at the voting station, any voting station on election day, and apply for a Section 24A vote. In other words, they want to vote at the voting station of a voting district in which they are not registered. In 2021, the Electoral Act was amended to introduce the requirement for prior notification. So this was in place quite some time already before our NPE. And in terms of the process, the patient could notify us between the 15th of March and the 17th of May that they want to then vote not at their voting station, essentially. And they had to indicate to us where. It was no use to tell us simply, oh, I want to vote, I'm registered in Cape Town, but I want to vote in George, or I want to vote in Joburg for that particular matter. We needed a level of specificity in terms of where do you want to vote, so that we can ensure that when the person arrives at that particular station, they are ready to receive him, and in fact they did notify us before the time. So you could notify us that you that you want to be you want to vote at a station in somewhere inside of our province, for example, or you could notify us that you're actually going to be outside of the province. The main difference there being that if you're outside of the province, you will only receive the national PR ballot because your provincial ballot and your regional ballot will not be available at a voting station which falls outside of a particular province. In terms of notifications, 57,483 notifications were received, and 30,115 citizens made use of the opportunity to vote at a station where they are not so then registered. Thank you. This just generally reflects again our voting station process. It's a standard process that we use. In our elections. Yeah, and generally what happens is this would be typically the situation that we'd like to have in a voting station. Now, sometimes it cannot always be. For example, the venue that is available to us has only one entrance, for example. Then you need to work through this as well. So again, a lot of times this process is dependent on the actual venue that we use, but we try and make sure that this is how the process flows, so that you start with a voters roll officer, because that is the legal requirement that you must be on the voters roll, and that we have to draw your name through on the hard copy voters roll, where after you will then get your ballot paper. There's the VMD, by the way, sorry, the VMD is also there, and we'll talk a little bit more about the VMD now. that is voter management device, and then the ballot paper process and issuing and casting of your vote. Thank you very much. So on election day, we have 1,572 voting stations in our province, of which 26 are temporary structures, and of which 687 are schools. Now, typically what we have is we try and reduce the number of temporary structures. In the past elections, I think it was as high as 35, and we've managed to bring it down because obviously the temporary structure is not always conducive. It's essentially a tent that is being rented by us, and it doesn't always lend itself out to a very easy way for people to vote using those temporary structures. However, we are confined to the fact that in some of our voting districts there just are no permanent or brick buildings. Of either they're not there or they're not available because it's a new development. It's a development or the whoever the owners of that property is not willing to rent the structure to us for the elections, etc. So there will always be those situations. Obviously, as human population developments take place, a lot of times the housing precedes any or rather, can I say, the schools or the halls, etc., follow after the development has already taken place. So in many cases, you actually don't have a particular structure. So, but we work on that process of things. 687 schools. We have a very good working relationship with the Western Cape Education Department to assist us in showing that schools become available. Unfortunately, again, in not all cases are the SGBs willing to rent out the property to us because we are required to have a lease agreement with every one of our voting station landlords. It's not just about us going there, but we actually have to enter into a lease agreement with them. But schools are optimal because obviously they're normally located within the community which is served by that particular voting district, and we have access to the school, and also the fact that the voters know the location of where the school is, etc. So it does assist us. It also helps us when we have what we call voting centers. A voting center is essentially a big voting station in which we have substations, if you want to put it that way. So in other words, in a very big voting station with a very large voter population, we will have streaming where we create sort of substations to assist the process as it goes through. As well. In terms of our voting stations, the last one on the election day opened at around 8 o'clock, and generally they were then operational. The VMD, or the voter management device, there's been a lot of talk about the voter management device. This device assists us as a key equipment in our voting process. On that voter management device would be, for example, your voters roll, clearly one, so that we can check and when we scan the ID that the person is registered and where they're registered. There's also an application on there for our electoral staff system. So in other words, that instead of keeping hard copies, we can simply scan the IDs of those staff who are present and then record who is there in terms of our attendance, etc. There's also opportunity for you to manage the number of overall ballots received at the particular voting station, etc. So there's a number of operations that are available on the voter management device. Now, since 2021, when this was introduced for the first time, and we did have some serious concerns in 2021 around its operations. There was a number of upgrades done to our voter management device. It also meant, however, that for this to work, and one of the things that we made sure that it is operational is that it's seamless between online and offline. So on election day, the problems were experienced when staff was misunderstanding, for example, that even if a VMD goes offline, it doesn't mean that it's not working. Unfortunately, our process to make sure that that the VMDs are clearly understood, the training is in place, etc. So it led in some areas where the voter management device was actually hindering and actually causing queues, which led us to by lunchtime to say to our voting stations, look, you don't have to use the voter management device. It is an aid. It is not a legal requirement. As I indicated earlier on, the voters roll, the hard copy voters roll is your control document that is there to ensure that we ensure that persons who are registered can vote at that particular station. So overall, while we had concerns and some issues with regard to the voter management device, it wasn't the sole cause for queues developing. There were many things that, and we have to look at that in terms of our own operations and our business flow at various stations and unpack it. Next thing was special vote versus Section 24A. So what happened is that you could either apply for one but not for both at the same time. In other words, if you're applying for a special vote, you're saying you want to vote before election day, in other words, the 27th, 28th of May. And if you're applying for the 24A, you are actually saying, listen, I'm not going to be at my voting state on election day, and I want to vote somewhere else. And that is a fundamental difference. So what was happening is that voters would apply for a special vote, get approval for that, and then subsequently apply then for a 24A to say, look, I'm not good, I want to vote somewhere else. What I don't realize is that the later application cancels the prior application. So you had situations where somebody arrives at the voting station saying, look, I applied for a special vote. I want to vote now on the Tuesday or the Monday. And unfortunately, his or her name would not be appearing on the special vote list, because we have a list of those approved applications. And that caused a lot of confusion as well. Or somebody would apply for the 24A and then arrive on special vote day saying, but I want to vote here today. And clearly 24A is only applicable on the actual election day. So there was confusion around that, and that's something obviously that we have to look at going forward, especially to do a little bit more voter education around the difference between special vote applications and 24A applications. I must, however, also remind members that the 24A notification, in other words, where you want to vote where you are not registered, does not apply during local government elections. For local government elections, especially because we're dealing with wards, a voter can only vote where they are registered. There won't be opportunity to vote somewhere else. We've started spreading that message already in our outreach events that has commenced post this election, just so that people get into the habit. We also make sure that this is communicated when we have ward by-elections. So again, that voters understand that they can only vote where they are registered as well. Ballot box versus envelopes. Now, this situation specifically relates to special voting. So for the special votes, we use what we call a double envelope system. The double envelope system involves, firstly, one, say, for example, you're going out on a home visit. You cannot obviously take all the ballot boxes with you. So you have a double envelope system. The first envelope is an unmarked envelope, and we request the voter to insert their marked ballot paper into that unmarked envelope, seal it, and then they have to place it into another bigger envelope. And on this outer envelope, which is then sealed, the name, ID number, and voting district of the voter appears, so that you can keep their vote secret. When you arrive at the voting station, or when the home visit team arrives at the voting station, the first thing they do is then they take out these marked envelopes, which are still sealed, and then they record the voter's details on the voter's roll and tick off that the person has marked. Thereafter, the inner sealed envelope, still being sealed, is then placed in the ballot box in the voting station. In that way, we've been able to control that, in fact, it is a valid voter, and a valid special vote, and the voter's name is ticked off. But then secondly, that his or her choice still remains secret, because now the unmarked envelope is mixed with everything else in the ballot box at the voting station. What happened was that in some cases at voting stations, for special votes at the voting station, some of our officials weren't using the envelopes. They simply said to voters, insert your ballot paper into the ballot box. Now, there's legally nothing wrong with that, in the sense that it doesn't declare your vote invalid, because it is still within a sealed ballot box, and that ballot box remains sealed with seals which agents inspect, and then those ballots are only counted with everything else on the night of the elections, after the elections, in other words, when the voting has stopped. So again, but there was a bit of confusion about when to use the envelopes at the voting station during special vote days or not. The universal ballot or ballot template, this UBT, this is a template we've developed together in conjunction with the South African Council for the Blind. It's essentially a template that allows a person, a voter who is visually impaired, to insert the normal ballot paper into the template. The template has sort of holes in it, gaps or whatever holes, so that when the ballot is placed in there, firstly the voter can actually there's a braille numbering on it, so the voter can actually determine where they want to vote at. They can feel their way, and they can make their mark without the assistance of anybody present. We had to obviously have two types of UBTs. The one, because we had a national ballot with 2 columns, and the others with single columns. But that is also something which is available to persons who are visually impaired, because your alternative is to bring somebody with you, a family member, another adult, and that adult will assist you to cast your vote if you are visually impaired. Party tents, canvassing, and agents. So yeah, party tents, this is really what happens outside of our voting stations, where political parties and independents are allowed to put up their sort of information tents or desks, or tables, caravans, whatever. Now, this is a history where it comes from, where political parties want to be able to assist their supporters before they go in. That becomes a problem. We will ask the party to move their table. If they don't move, we have the authority to ask the South African police person to assist with that. So tables and tents, yeah, even the music. Some members may ask me about all this music that goes on. So in terms of electoral legislation, on election day, you're not allowed, or rather not election day, sorry, when voting is taking place. What the law says, I think is section 109, says on voting day, no organized event like a public meeting, rally, etc., is allowed to take place anywhere in the country. All right, but that's like an organized event, like a rally. The law doesn't say anything about ordinary canvassing, etc. So on election day, as long as it's taking place outside the boundaries of the voting station, you can still bring your voters, you can drive your voters in there, you can still be issuing your pamphlets, etc., trying to motivate people to vote for your party. So, but there's always a sort of thing that people say, yeah, but there's a cooling off period. The cooling off period only relates to the holding of public events like rallies or meetings or things like that, not to the normal sort of canvassing. That's why you'll see music still being played on election day as well, albeit only in certain areas, not every place. But it always becomes a sense of or a cause for complaints. We receive a lot of complaints, and I always tell political parties, you know what, you're complaining about this happening, but your people are doing the same thing somewhere else. Ooh, yeah. So for now, tables and tents are allowed and regulated outside of the voting station. Whether the law will change, I don't know. Yeah. Similarly with agents, all the parties have agents, and we encourage agents to be trained and attend our training, or at least that parties will allow us to. I've offered that says, look, I know that when you're doing party training, you also dealing some of your secrets, so you don't want us always to be there. But if you want us to have a look at your training manual so that we can just make sure that the election process part is in line with what we have in terms of our training and the law as well, that can work. But often we find that agents are sort of brought in day before or right even on election day, and because they don't understand the process, they tend to sometimes be a bit disruptive, to the extent that even other agents start complaining about them and saying, you know what, this guy is just holding up the process, etc. So we always urge political parties and independents, make sure that you train your agents to understand what are the processes at the voting station, so that there's not an unnecessary disruption. I'm not saying that you cannot make objections. It is your right to make objections, but sometimes they just don't, and they just raise points that are not really points of an issue. I've dealt with queues. There were a number of voting stations, and I've been on record that where there were queues, and those queues really where a voter doesn't have a very good voting experience. That's on us, and we need to work on. I know people will say, yeah, but queues is a way of life in South Africa, but I don't think as a election management body we should simply sit back and say, well, it is what it is in that regard. So we are looking at certainly in my province at the voting stations where there were queues, and what was the reasons for it. Staff performance. Was it the fact that our staff wasn't doing what they were supposed to doing, which led to queues because they were either too slow in dealing with issues or whatever, they were overwhelmed? Was it the VMD causing a problem? I don't know. Was it a situation of just the layout of the voting station per se, because there was just too many people? But those are things that we obviously have to be looking at in terms of managing and ensuring that our voters generally have a similar voting experience that is conducive for them to say, look, I like to vote as well. But generally there were queues, and that meant that, you know, we enforce the law that says that anybody in the queue as at 9 o'clock will be allowed to vote. So nobody was turned away at 9 o'clock if they were at the voting station. We determined that they were in the queue and they were allowed to vote, even if it meant late into the evening, but they were nonetheless still allowed to cast their ballots, which they then did as well. Thank you. Just to give you an idea that one of the issues that we have, and it's one of my sort of areas that we sort of have challenges with, is staff recruitment. So the IEC will issue adverts for electoral staff and expansion staff. On our website, we work together with municipalities and their communications officers, and they will place it on their message boards, etc. I issue media statements about the fact that we are recruiting. We have a Facebook page. We work very well with especially the TVET colleges to make sure that young people also understand that we are busy with recruiting, and then also obviously all our stakeholders. We have a number of organizations, be it NGOs, community-based organizations, forums, etc., that we have on our database. And when we are recruiting, we'll simply send out an advert saying, please make sure if any of your members are interested, go to the IEC website, register. We use a e-recruitment system. In other words, you go onto our website and you create a profile. You put in your details, etc. You load your CV, because it's the same system even for permanent staff applications as well. So you have it there. You register yourself. You create a profile, and then thereafter you go look for, look for whatever vacancies are available, and you click. So you only have to upload your information once onto our system, and thereafter you can apply for work. To work, whether it's if there's a permanent position available or an expansion staff or even as electoral voting officer on the day. So that is something that we need to look at also in terms of our recruitment strategies. Next, please. So just to give you an idea of our requirements for presiding and deputy presiding officer, you must have at least 5 years professional supervisory or administrative work experience, or been previously a presiding officer. You must be proficient in local languages, demonstrate ability to work well under pressure, etc. To have a driver's license, have a phone. And then we also have a online training system. So we'd ask the presiding officers to go online and do at least module 1. I think there's 3 modules, just so that they get an understanding broadly, firstly, of what the IEC does and its mandate. Very importantly, also our presiding officers and deputy presiding, their names are presented at the local liaison committees where parties are represented and those contestants. And if parties are given opportunity then to lodge an objection, if somebody has a high political profile or is a office bearer of a party, etc. So we give them that opportunity. I think in this past elections, I only received 2 objections. I think one was in the South Cape and one was in the Karoo. But parties are given, because we work on the fact that at local level people know people, and your local reps generally will know, or their supporters will know who people are, and if there's any reason for us not to appoint somebody because of bias, that due to their political office profile, we then will not use them. Again, why I'm putting this out there is again just to indicate to members, this is our standard that we set out there to recruit. So typically, we if you look at the fact that you need 5 years experience, you're not going to get like an 18-year-old or even a 20-year-old, 22-year-old being a presiding officer, because you won't have the necessary experience in terms of that. Because typically, a presiding officer, deputy presiding officer, these are the senior roles within our voting station, and we're always looking to recruit competent, capable individuals who have the necessary experience, and generally to have the administrative capacity, but also mostly to be able to work in a situation of a voting station. You're dealing with a lot of people, you're dealing with agents who want your time and attention, and just managing a voting station overall. So we're really looking to make sure that we can then recruit competent staff for especially the role of presiding and deputy presiding officer. Thank you. Again, just in terms of the breakdown, I know in the past, or still, I think teachers, people always have an issue about teachers. Yeah, why you mustn't use teachers now. In this province, we had just under 18,800 staff that was working for our elections, of which 14,000 were unemployed. So firstly, people say, yeah, but I see you don't use unemployed people. But that is not true. The numbers show that 14,102 of the electoral staff were unemployed. If you look at the teachers, because there is an unfortunate association that says you cannot use teachers. Now, as the IEC, we don't discriminate by association in terms of your profession, and persons are obviously free to apply. In the case with teachers, as in other government officials, if you apply, obviously there are rules within your own department that you have to follow around getting permissions, etc., etc. But yeah, but teachers generally are people that you'd like to have at a voting station, especially where it's a school, and the teacher is from that school, so they know the people, they know the setup, and generally the teachers have the experience and the skills to be presiding officers in that particular regard. If you look at the age breakdown, again, 4,170 of our staff was under 25. And these are typically in the support roles that are played at the voting station, like your inker, your ballot paper issuer, etc., etc. And then, so you can actually, members can actually see the breakdown of how it looks in terms of the age breakdown. Then also the gender breakdown. More women and then men work in our voting stations. Thank you very much. Just to give you a brief overview of in terms of our outreach, this is our voter education activities. Before the elections, about 16 months before a general election, we bring in additional capacity to assist us in terms of our outreach. So we have municipal electoral coordinators. In other words, in each one of the municipalities, we have a mock. And in the case, in some of our regions, we may have more than one. And they, in turn, we will also recruit what we call democracy education field workers. These are people that will go out and do field work in terms of our democracy campaigns. So up until the 30th of April, we had just under 20,000 events that we held or had. Now, event is not only like a workshop. Event can be where we go to a two-song center where people are gathering as well, and we will go and do vote education amongst them, hand out fact sheets, etc., etc. So we've done a lot of outreach, and outreach typically is divided into sort of phases of one. You do the general civic education, and then a little bit closer to the elections, we go into a voter education, in terms of which we say generally, look, this is what you expect in the voting station, etc., etc. And then in the last phase, it is what we call balloting education, where you really get down and say, look, yeah, this is a ballot paper. This is what you expect. This is how it will look and feel within the voting station. So there's a number of phases in terms of our outreach process that we have. Thank you. The IC has a continuous ongoing process of engaging with our stakeholders. For example, we have a schools democracy program. This is something which happens every year. We launched in the previous year, just before the elections, we launched our school democracy campaign in Kraaifontein at the high school there, and then we go visit schools. In a year, we typically do about just over 200 school visits where we go to specifically more generally your high schools, because those are the ones that we look at, especially from grade 10 onwards, where we'll do voter education. We'll take our VMD device with us. We work very closely with Home Affairs in that regard, so that when they are taking and delivering IDs, especially to those first time young people that get their IDs, we are there to at the same time to offer to register them also on the voters roll. We also and there I must say we work very well with the WCED, especially through the districts, where we can have these opportunities to engage with them in terms of that. Tertiary institutions campaign, we go to our universities and TVET colleges, especially during their orientation. Even after orientation, we're on the campuses giving out information, also providing opportunity for the students to register. Government departments, I've mentioned our education department. Home Affairs, I've mentioned. Sports, arts and culture, we also work with them, especially when they give us their events and we can piggyback on them, GCIS, etc. So we do work very well with especially the provincial government departments as well in terms of our stakeholder engagements. So we work with organizations that deal with young people, with women, persons with disabilities. We have general engagements. I had a session with the agriculture sector where Agri Western Cape, together with business organizations, work organizations, political parties, were all present to work on a protocol in terms of reasonable access to our farms for the purposes of vote education, as well as for political parties who want to be able to access. So that took place prior to the elections. We also then engaged specifically on trade unions, as well as faith-based organizations, and then media in terms of holding a media workshop in order so that we can go through the electoral process, so that journalists can also understand the different phases of the elections, what happens in different processes, etc. Interviews, I've conducted, my goodness gracious, probably 42, 20, more than 50 interviews in the run-up to the elections. Just in terms of on radio, TV, even with the print as well. Again, the idea is we're just going out there, engaging, making sure that the information and communication goes out there. Observer organizations, we had nationally quite a lot of observer organizations, over 100, more than I think 150, I'm not sure. But in our province, of those 33 organizations indicated they will be operating within our province. So we had a number of organizations accredited to observe the elections across the province. Thank you. In terms of discussions, one thing we're looking at, chairpersons and members, is looking at our voting districts going forward. As you know, that the process for the local government elections starts with the National Minister of Local Government determining the formula for the number of councillors in each municipality. Thereafter, the MEC Minister in local, in our case, the Minister for Local Government, Minister Pradel, will have to then determine the number of councillors, and once they do that, it is handed over to the Municipal Demarcation Board, who has to then go out and deal with wards, demarcate wards. Now that particular process where we currently are, I think is still, I speak under correction, they're still waiting for the national minister with a formula. But when it comes to the IEC, typically the MDB uses our voting districts as building blocks. However, there's a lot of changes that happened in our voting districts due to population movements. We have large inflows of people into our province. We also have housing developments that are occurring, not only new developments, but even within existing areas where there's new renovations taking place, upgrades taking place, etc. That all impacts on the size of a voting district. So in this province, what we are looking at is a redelimitation process to look at where these population movements have occurred, what is the size of our voting districts, where there are very big voting districts, in other words, big as in large number of voters. We're looking to possibly, if we can split those voting districts so that we can accommodate the voters easier and better. Same with the voting stations. We need to look at voting stations. Are they optimum? As I indicated, Chairperson, we sometimes have the only venue is that venue, and we have to make do. But are there alternative venues? That's something that we have to look at. Candidate nomination process. Members will remember that in this election, there was a lot of court cases. I think there was something like 18 challenges in the electoral court around candidate nomination with parties or individuals challenging the process, either because they were not, they didn't comply and they wanted to be included, etc. But the one thing that stood out was the fact that online candidate nominations works the best, as opposed to having a plethora of people coming to local offices to hand in nominations. So especially we're looking to learn from that process around candidate nomination and to encourage especially political parties that contest across the board in a municipality to use the online registration, online candidate nomination system. It's straightforward, it's easy, and the political party is always in control of the list. In other words, the order in which they're appearing, not appearing, they have their own unique code, so nobody else can jump in on their list, etc., etc. So that is something that we're also looking at in terms of the local government elections, and just obviously, if you look at just the number of participants in our elections, we may just have even more participants in the local government elections in 2026, late 2026, early or January 2027, when the local government elections will be taking place. Improving communications, I think that is an ongoing challenge for the IEC to increase its ways of engaging with voters, maybe even starting a little bit earlier. In terms of the communication, one of the things that did inhibit us this time around, Chairperson, is that the last amendment to the Electoral Act was only signed into law, I think, on the 8th of May. Now, that creates a lot of sort of, from a communications messaging point of view, some serious challenges. But we hope that going forward, we need to have a better legislation is finalized much quicker. Our regulations can in turn be finalized, and our messaging can go on better as well. I mentioned the fact about 24A that in local government elections, you can only vote where you are registered, that opportunity. And it's going to be important that we get that message to voters, because voters don't always understand, but simply say, yeah, but I voted here last time, why can't I vote here? Not understanding necessarily that, look, the one was a national election and this is local government election. So it's going to be critical that we engage with voters to make sure they understand. Same like with the special vote application process. This one is more, Chairperson, around specifically home visits applications. You can apply for a home visit online on our online platform. And what happens is that we receive all these applications, they are approved, and when our teams and go out to do home visits, they come to a home and the person's not there because they're working or whatever, or the person is there and they say, no, but I never applied. Somebody applied on my behalf. Or you get there and it's somebody clearly who, because remember with home visits, you either infirm, you're disabled or pregnant. Now you get there and it's a youngster sitting on the stoop. And why you're not there, but why can't I apply? So there is a level, I'm not saying it is a wide ranging, but there is a level of abuse where proxies are used to apply on behalf of people and they're not. And this doesn't only affect the IEC, it impacts obviously on the voter, but also on the parties, because remember political parties follow the IEC when we're doing home visits. There's a whole little convoy together with SAPs. They have to also make resources available. So it does create challenges for us around that. And we'll have to look at how best to manage that particular process, because on the one hand, you cannot prejudice the voter with too much administrative burdens, but on the other hand, you need to make sure that the process is also not abused, unfortunately. So that is something that we have. It's something that we engage constantly with political parties in our party liaison committees as well, on a continuous basis in terms of that. Improving the voter experience, I think I spoke about that. How do we make sure that generally our voters have a similar voting experience, that you're not, in some way saying, but listen, I didn't actually have a nice time voting, I waited too long, or whatever the case may be. To the best of our ability, we need to make sure that we improve on the voter experience on election day. Staff recruitment strategies. We need to look at also ways in which we can cast our net maybe to get staff. In some cases, we have areas where we don't receive any applications, which means we bring staff from different parts, for example, in the metro, to come and work in a station. And it's unfortunate because typically, one of the requirements is you must be a registered voter. So we immediately know that you are from an area. This helps because you understand the area, you know the streets, what is happening, etc. Even when it comes to language, it helps. So it is something that we need to look at around staff recruitment strategies. How do we get more people to know and to apply? How do we make sure that persons who are applying are in fact competent and can assist us to manage stations? And I'm looking specifically around the management function. Civil servants. I don't know. It's something that we need to explore further around that as well, to make sure that we can also engage on those processes. Party agent appointment and training, again, we will engage with parties early on. I know that I'm probably not going to be able to reach every party because we don't always know who's contesting, but if we can get to a critical mass of parties who are contesting elections and say, let's work with you to have your agents trained. Again, I know sometimes parties don't always have the people available very early. They don't always know, but if we can get to a critical mass so that we can just have a better process within the voting stations, agents know when to object and that they can object, because sometimes agents just don't know they can object as well. But yeah, so that is something we should definitely have to look at. The code of conduct. This is the code of conduct, electoral code of conduct. We find that parties find different ways to work around this, and it's difficult to always enforce it. As you know, that the Supreme Court of Appeal has indicated that when it comes to sanctions for breaches of code of conduct, that is only a court that can do it. IEC cannot, in fact, is not allowed to issue a sanction. We can't even instruct a party to apologize. So that was a decision of the Supreme Court of Appeal. So these particular matters must go to the electoral court, preferably, because that's a specialized court with a status of a high court, so that they can be dealt with, and the court can hear the matter, because they have the experience and the skills to deal with evidence and to make decisions based on credibility of witnesses, etc., etc. But yeah. So the enforcement of that code, we often find a lot of complaints, but while we engage with both complainant and the alleged transgressor, we can only deal so in terms of trying to reconciliate that particular process. So a lot of it depends on the maturity of the representatives we're working with to say, guys, get your people not to do this, or whatever the case may be. So that is something that we have to look at. The code of conduct overall, but that is something maybe for Parliament. Because does it take into account our more sort of cyber society that we're living in now, in terms of its provisions as well. Speaking of cyber communication strategies, social media is here to stay and it's booming. Unfortunately, there's a lot of fake news that comes out and a lot of misinformation, and it's difficult for the IEC alone to deal with this, because it's a societal issue, and I think it requires a whole of society issue, a response rather, sorry. And we will continue to do our best in terms of responding to the sort of fake news. But the problem is always that, for once it goes out there, it's difficult if you need to be tracking everything and responding right away, or else it's difficult to counter sometimes the fact that there's misinformation, and it is concerning. You will know that the electoral court has issued fines to individuals who breached the code of conduct by making claims around the election and threats with regard to the election result, and that's good that there is but generally the issue of disinformation and misinformation remains something which we as a society in South needs to be working through. And then lastly, how do we increase as the IEC? I think that's one of my big challenges, also our challenges, not mine, but as an organization. How do we increase our footprints? We work with a multitude of organizations around the province in terms of being able to access their footprint, because the IEC cannot always sort of compete with an existing organization. It's better to work with organizations, and so that is a continuing engagement that we do as well. One of the things we do now is a sort of community outreach event where IEC will organize a community event and then invite service departments like your health, justice, social development, and SASSA, the local municipality, even organizations like Molo Songololo, to come to our event, and then so that we're not only talking about civic democracy, but you actually thereafter immediately making sure that these service department representatives are there and assist members of the community. We've done one in Maritzburg last year. We've done earlier this year. We did one in Herbertsdale, and we will be going out to a number of other locations. Specifically, looking at areas that are typically not close to where people are in the deep rural areas. They don't always be able to access government services. Don't normally come to them. So those are some of the things we're looking at to make the experience of democracy and civic education a little bit more real in terms of the accessing of services. Thank you, Chairperson. I know I've spoken for an hour, so thank you for bearing with me, members. So questions, comments? Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hendricks. I mean, I think that was particularly interesting. And thank you very much for highlighting those issues. Okay, I'm going to throw it open to questions. If people could please put their hands up, and if I can just ask the procedural officer to assist me in spotting people. So yes, please, colleagues, if anyone's got any questions. I'm going to start on the left-hand side of my screen. I have Mr. Hendricks, I just want to check with you. Do you want to deal with each member asking all their questions and they can answer that member, or how would you like to deal with it?
Either way, Chairperson, I'm not sure how you manage your meetings, but if you think I should wait, take a couple and then answer, or deal with them as they come through, I'm easy.
Okay, let's do it per member then. Honourable Bryant, do you want to ask your questions?
Thanks very much, Chairperson, and thank you, Mr. Hendrickse, for that extensive presentation. And I think a lot of questions that may have been asked were answered through your presentation. So I can see you've given a lot of interviews on this, those 50 interviews you mentioned. Clearly been asked a lot of these questions already. But I just want to come back to one issue, which I think seemed to be an ongoing challenge during the election period, which was the training and capacitation of IEC staff. And again, this is certainly not, to point fingers at anybody in particular, but we did hear from a number of people that the turnaround times were quite short in terms of training for some of the IEC staff. Is the intention to begin that training earlier for the 2026 local government elections? Because I think sort of a higher level of training for staff and maybe some more extensive experience could go a long way to helping to expedite and speed up some of those processes at the voting stations. Thank you.
Mr. Hendricks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, can I just again context? Situations at voting stations weren't singular, and it's what I'm doing is I'm trying to find, because in a particular one station everything is going so smooth. Then you say, what is happening here? And in the next station, right in the adjacent voting district, things are not going so well. So yes, one of the areas that we have picked up is on training. And again, without making excuse because of the legislation change very late, or remember those court cases, a simple thing like all those court challenges around the candidate nomination process, it meant that we were very late in able to determine who are all the participants and then produce a pamphlet of some sort to say, here are the things. Similarly, not only for the voters, but also for our own staff, because remember, I think I stand corrected, member, that we had 8 parties, for example, whose name starts with African. All right, you have a number of parties who sound similar: United Independent Movement, United Democratic Movement. So you have a lot of these things. So you need to also be able to train your staff and say, guys, be aware that listening when you're counting ballots, for example, I'm just making one example, make sure that you don't get confused between the parties. One party was at abbreviation CCC, but their name is actually National Colored Congress. Now people think, okay, where's CCC or NCC? In the meantime, the only NCC is a NCCP, which is registered in the Northern Cape. So what I'm trying to say is it does affect the training part. So I think what we should be looking at is saying, okay, what is your basic models? In other words, this is the old process and stuff like that, and then leave more time for what we call refresher training. So you deal with as much of the bulk of your training, and then say there's a little bit of extra that we need to keep, and we're going to come back to you, because as with everything, there's always some little change. But I definitely hear you, and the plan is really to look at how we can start. But that training goes hand in hand with the recruitment. I need to bring people on board a little bit earlier, so that we can then say, here's modules, go through the modules, etc. But I definitely take your point, and that is something that we need to work on as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Honourable Walters.
Yeah, Chair, I listened to the answer to what Member Brian said. It was a bit of a description of what the kind of challenges the IEC faces around those matters. I would like to very specifically know what is the plan in terms of addressing or making sure that there are across the board capable staff. I can also share lots of anecdotal experiences as somebody that has, I've been involved in elections since '94. I've been in probably hundreds of by-elections. There is a caliber problem. There is a competency problem, which is of huge concern. In fact, I would say that to me is a bigger concern than other political parties or the behavior of people. In fact, I think generally speaking, political parties have respect for one another, but frustrations arise when avoidable mistakes and simply people who do not understand the role or their function on the IEC side create frustrations. So I do think it's a very serious problem, and I would really like to hear what the comprehensive plan is from the IEC to source people that understand what they are supposed to be doing, and then what training will be done. Look, I think we can all share stories and frustrations, and I genuinely have appreciation for the task that the IEC has. But I do think at the end of the day, we need to early on have a sense of what the plans are, in fact, to avoid the kind of problems that we've been seeing. And maybe also let me zoom in on a particular problem that we've seen increasingly appearing in elections, and that is massive queues that start developing late, particularly towards the end of the elections. It does create huge problems, voters leaving the queues, unnecessary pressure on the day. One of the problems that we saw in the past is often the necessary number of ballots and the necessary objection forms, the paperwork, the materials that the IEC uses are often not there. At stations, it's often, or at least it's the reason that the political parties are given. What kind of an audit take place, and what checks and balances are in place to absolutely ensure that there's enough ballot papers and enough objection forms and enough of that it is in fact there before polling stations start? What are the checks and balances, and are there areas that needs improvement? And maybe as an example, I know that the IEC often give opportunities for people to check and raise concerns about individuals, whether they are politically affiliated or not, that serve on the IEC staff. There's a checks and balances process there in place, but is there something similar in place in terms of guaranteeing that the necessary materials that the IEC need is in fact there? And yes, and then also what plans are in place to avoid the absolutely hugely concerning queuing that takes place at voting stations in, well, I don't think it's only in the Western Cape, but across the country. Thank you very much.
Hendricks?
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Walter. So firstly, for example, we started with a performance review where we look at, for example, at the stations. I've asked my team to look at the performance at each station, because as I said, there's the reasons for something happening is a number. It's not always the case that somebody's incompetent. There may be other reasons for that. It may just be the location of the station, etc. So we're looking at creating that without saying, okay, here's the one problem, and then as if that is going to solve the problem. So it has to start with, obviously, with a performance review, looking at at who we used at those stations. What was the experience? Was it the right person to be recruited? You're right. To what extent do we sit with a situation where we're looking for people, and the ones that we want are not applying? And that's the weirdest thing, that you do all of these sort of ways in which you go out and look at. So and you then say, so where is it? For example, one of the strategies around recruitment is going to the organized sections of where you can actually be able to access staffing, whether it is civil servants, say, for example, at the Department of Education, and say, look, here, we need more of your staff to help us because you've got all of the experience. Whether this is going to business, organized business, saying, listen, can you make sure that you encourage your staff to be available to work for the IEC? Go there. It's going to take you 2 weekends of training, and that's what we hope to achieve, 2 weekends of training, so that people are competent. You need to minimize the issues that cause these sort of queues, for example. If you look at our business process at the voting station, one of the things that we need to look at is, and we're reviewing, is, for example, how do we manage our voting station? At the moment, and I make this as an example only, you have a queue walker. Mr. Walters. All right. So the queue walker is currently, as we call it, a low level employee. But what I want is that you convert that person or the position into a queue manager, because that is the first person that the voter encounters. That person should know enough or the same as your presiding officer, because what's happening now, for example, again, as an example only, the person is in the queue. Now they wait until they get to the right in front and then to be told this is not right or that's not right. That person could have been told much earlier. It manages your queue better and you can redirect the voter directly as well. In the past, we were able to have, you may recall, seeing that you've been around so long, Mr. Walters, but we had the zip machine. That was an excellent queue management device that we had. So you scan the voter, you can immediately tell the voter you were at the right place. This time around, we do not have that particular device. It's just no longer in use. It cannot be used any longer. It's obsolete. So is our voter management device being used at the right place? Because you're creating another sort of stop inside the voting station. Should we not be using it outside? So those are things that we have to review. Obviously, I cannot give you details of a plan at this stage. We're just coming out of our review, and we need to look at the pros and cons of any changes we want to make in terms of that. In terms of materials, there's a clear process for making sure that all our stations have enough. Now, again, why is it that a particular station didn't have enough ballot papers? Is it in fact so? So we have to check that particular station, because we made sure that there's enough ballot papers, for example. You cannot run out of ballot papers. How could you have run out of? So you have to look at that particular incident where that is used as an excuse, and not make it a generalized sort of concern. So those are the things that we have. But essentially, it comes down to your competency of your staff. Can he manage or she manage? Does he know how to respond? Does he understand the bigger picture, the context, to make sure that you can actually respond to the challenges that you get at that? So it really starts with your staffing. You have to recruit the right staff, and you have to then make sure that they are trained to understand the process. I always say you don't train for them to do, you must train for them to understand. And that is how we have to respond to those particular things. So yes, there are the challenges, but we need to make sure that we are putting in place. So at this stage, Mr. Walters, I cannot give you a plan. I can't say A, B, C, and D. You have to allow me to come back to the committee at a later stage and say, this is what I'm putting in place in our province as well. So yes, but I can't give you the plan and say, boom, there it is. But I'm willing to come back at another stage to engage with the committee.
Thank you very much. Honourable van Wyk.
Thanks, Chair, for the opportunity to address a few questions to Mr. Hendricks. And I think just following on what he's just indicated, I think one of the biggest difficulties at the voting stations appear to be the lack of warning signals going out, or in terms of the management systems, where those voting stations were processing too few voters per hour. And I think there are numerous examples of where those queues just got longer and longer, and then became the huge struggle and the interventions that were needed to get response and get more resources on the ground to deal with the issues at those voting stations. And as a result of that, many of those voting stations had to stay open for quite a few hours after closing time. Now that indicates that somewhere that it's not only training of staff and staff that understand what they need to do, and alerting that they have problems on the ground, but it's almost a management system as such in the processes of running that election. And I'm not sure whether the IEC is considered to get an element of professional help out there that can analyze what took place in the past election to try and deal with that. So I think that's the one aspect. The other aspect that I found in the last few weeks and the days before that election were the occurrences where you find voters suddenly waking up that they are possibly not registered, that they're not registered at the correct address, that they've suddenly that they have are going to be away on election day, and somehow or other we're not getting through, or the IEC is not getting through to all the voters as to what their responsibility is as a voter, to make sure that they are registered in the correct place and are doing that. And I don't know what IEC is doing to try and reach reach voters, and with the urgency that they need to register in time and need to do the correct registration process so that they are able to vote. So I think to me, it appears that there's some work that's still required in that area. So I'd like to hear some comments, if any, from Mr. Hendricks there. Thank you.
Thank you, member. So yes, I agree 100% with you in terms of our training. We need to be able to, firstly, one, or rather our processes, we need to be monitoring a situation so that we can actually pick up a trend. I think that's maybe where you're getting to and saying what's happening there, because we typically should be having that, and this is the report we're getting in terms of what's to almost preempt and say, but listen here, something is happening there is not happening like it's supposed to be. Send a team out there and go and investigate and intervene, and rather wait for, instead of waiting for later when it is an actual big problem. But what I'm trying to say also, member, is that some of it we have to preempt. For example, at Bastion, the school out in Brackenfell, you have just under 8,000 voters at one station. 8,000, that's a lot of people. Now, we can't say, no, people mustn't come and vote, or we must be. So what is it? So is it not a solution for us to split that voting district into 2 or 3? So that you can actually have a manageable number of voters picking up. So it's not always just about the fact that either our process or our staff, but it's just the way in which we've done our voting districts. Now, there may be a number of reasons why we don't split it, but it will mean that it takes extra work, and that's why I mentioned, member, during the course of my presentation that this whole redelimitation, we need to look at our voting districts and say, given the fact that we've increased by so many people, is it not time that we need more voting districts, because then it becomes more manageable in the sense of making sure that people, instead of all going to one school, you're going to 3 different schools in a particular space. Hopefully the schools are available for us. But those are the things. So I'm not just saying we look at the end product, but maybe also the pre-product in terms of identifying that. Yes, remember, yes, I've now indicated to you the number of sort of events we go through and stuff like that, and it's really difficult to assess. We say we go and do all of these things. We're on television, we're on radio, we're doing events, we go out, we ask our partners, our community organizations, everybody's out there spreading the word. Why is it that some people just don't register on time, for example? Is it because we think we're going to do it, there's still always going to be another opportunity? Or people think that I'm somehow, I want to be treated special, make an exemption for me or whatever. I don't know. We try our best, but what I do know is that it cannot just be the IEC. We've communicated even through for example we have engagement with the provincial legislature in terms of their outreach projects. Just to say we partner on all of these things. So wherever we reach, we're sharing the information across different platforms. So it's something that we really try and spread the information out on social media. We've got Facebook pages, etc., etc. So it's very difficult to determine, for example, why somebody doesn't register on time and then wants to register and then says make a plan or apply for a special vote. I know it's difficult. It's always not easy for you to preempt and say, I don't know, I'm going to be sick in 2 weeks' time. However, the logistics of managing elections for 27 million South Africans in 23,000 voting stations over a 14-hour period is massive. So you need some level of planning and limitation or reasonable limitation to say, look, you need to apply by a particular date. We just cannot assist everybody. So overwhelmingly, we ensure that people have the opportunity to vote and they actually cast their vote, but we can always get better. I'm not trying to say that we can't, but I think, but we need everybody on deck in terms of making sure that the information goes out to as many people as possible. It's something that we will continue, obviously, but we need assistance from all role players. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hendricks. In the absence of any other hands, I'm going to take the last slot just to ask you a couple of questions that I'd be interested in. One, you were talking about VDs being so large, voting districts, and I certainly think that that's a problem. Are there plans, and I know this reflects on budget, to look at putting a cap on the size of voting districts? Related to that, in terms of the special votes, sorry, I think what was effective, certainly in some areas, is having station votes as special votes in the 2 days prior to the elections. There were a lot of rumors going around about people being able to automatically register if they were over a certain age, etc., etc. Are there plans to look at that going forward? Because it seems to be a good way of decanting some of the bigger voting stations. And then lastly, something we really never touch on, which is the issue of the count. Now, the problem with the count is everyone has had an extremely long day. The IEC staff have generally had 3 long days. And one is beginning to pick up problems with counts being completed and being completed correctly. So is the emphasis being placed on that, and possibly even in some places thinking about bringing in fresh teams so that one has people who can actually get the count done timeously, so that, I mean, at the end of the day, that is what it's all about. And yeah, what is the IEC thinking about that? And then I see when you've answered me, I see that the Honourable Sayed also has a question. Thank you, Mr. Hendricks.
Okay. Thanks very much. Yes, as I indicated, we're having a process of re-looking at our voting districts, especially the more larger ones, and to see to what extent we can resplit. Now, typically in a particular area, you know, it's impossible to draw a line just because the way of the settlement is there. It's very difficult to draw a line and say, okay, through here we're gonna go halfway, and there your only solution is to maintain that voting district, but then have a voting center where you can actually have more enforced streaming to allow that particular process. So we are going through that review, but as I indicated, Chairperson, also that we're also mindful of the MDB process. We can't cut too much because the MDB uses our voting districts as building blocks for a ward. It may be that at the end of their process, the MDB process, they are actually drawing a line through one of our VDs, which means that we split our VD as well. So we're working closely, or want to work closely with the MDB in that process, so that we can see how we can manage that. But certainly, it's something that is on as one of the interventions that we're doing. As I indicated, it's not just the one thing, but definitely looking at the size of our voting districts, especially in the metro. You know, in the metro, you have issues of density. Outside of the metro, you have issues of the distance that people have to travel. So it's not like a one-size-fits-all situation that we have to take into account. But certainly the teams, I've instructed the teams to start looking at that and see what proposals we can come up in terms of voting districts and their sizes as well. Special votes, yes, I agree with you, Chairperson, that essentially what the legislation has done is it makes it very easy for persons to come and to cast a special vote at the voting station. The criterion for home visits is very clear: disabled, infirm, or pregnant. For the purposes of special voting at the station, there is you don't have to have a reason. You simply saying, I can't come on election day. You know, that's it. We don't question you and say, is it work? Is it whatever holiday, it's irrelevant to us. All you do is you apply before the time and say, and then come and yes, it will then relieve. So effectively you have 3 days of voting as opposed to 1 day of voting. However, it must be managed. We can't simply have an open special votes, because remember, Chairperson, we need to also manage the ballot papers. We can't have too many ballot papers, because those ballots must then be used that are stored and secured, etc., over a period. So we need to manage the number of ballots issued for special vote purposes, so that we can also manage the overall security of the ballot papers. But yes, you are correct. I don't know if we're going to get to a stage where we simply say, if you're 60 or over, please just arrive at the voting station. We don't always have the population breakdown of a particular voting district in a sequence. It's something that if we have to look at, maybe, but interesting, Chairperson. In some cases, some of your older folk will say, no, but I want to vote on election day. I don't want to vote on special vote. I want to vote on. Okay, that is anecdotal. I accept that as anecdotal, but it's something that clearly we want to ensure that people make use of special vote days. And come and vote at the voting station. Apply and come and vote, and it is very easy for you to do. Result counting, yes, I touched on the issue of counting and fatigue also. You're right, and that's why I said we had, for example, dummy result slips. These are A0 size. Is A0? Yeah. Or A3 size, where we literally said to our presiding officers, here is a dummy result slip. It is in the sequence of which parties are appearing. Use this and put your results, because sometimes you get, as I said, you get a bit tired and you transpose here or there, and so on. So you can play around. So that is something that we also introduced. We did have counting assistants this time around, where we employed people to come on board around 6 o'clock to help the presiding officer in the counting. So that remains something that we want to look at, to make sure that the counting is conducted and conducted well. It is so, Chairperson, members, that that counting generally will take place through the night because of the numbers, and it's not in some cases we go through the whole counting process, and the agent who's been present there now demands a recount. You've been there the whole day. You've been checking what's been happening. You've been there when we're counting the thing. Now, just because you don't like the result, now you insist on a recount. That's something that we have to manage as well, because recounts is literally there where there's grounds for recounts, and not simply because every participant has the right to ask for the recount, because then we'll never get done as well. So those are the things that we have to manage. So on the one hand, you need to make sure that your presiding officer understands what happens, but also controls the situation, because you have sometimes agents coming and making demands that are, or simply trying to take over a process when they're not allowed to take over a process as well. But it's something that just must be managed better at our things. But certainly that is also emphasis that we do around our training, to make sure that people understand the counting process is clear, and you get it right. You do it right first time, and then you have less issues in terms of queries afterwards about the results. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There are two people left who've got questions. I'm then going to bring this briefing to a close. So, Honourable Syed.
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the presentation and for the responses. I'm largely covered by the responses to many of the questions, but mine are twofold. The one is with result to the actual voting. So let me start there first. So, one of the challenges that one experiences, especially in poor and working class communities, and because it tends to be people wake up in a shack. They wake up in the morning, it's raining already because of the socio-economic conditions. I think that's largely because of us as political parties, what hope we inspire or don't inspire at times. People don't want to come out to vote. But then they decide to come out to vote. Then they stand in long queues, that's fine, but it's raining, it's extreme weather conditions, people are already struggling. Do we have mechanisms in place, at least? I mean, or is there going to be maybe a request for resources to ensure that our old people, especially, don't have to stand in the rain, for example? I'm just giving you that's number one. Number two, also, with regards to the issue of voting, quite a number of workplaces, one of them being, for example, petrol stations, factories. We've experienced this firsthand, where the bosses at these places basically do not allow the workers to go and vote. Or you've got to go and vote, I mean, like at an odd hour when it's your time to go home to sleep, for example. So I just want to know, what is the level of engagement with various companies? I mean, maybe if it's through labor or if it's with government, just to ensure that nobody is disadvantaged, that voting is not viewed as a privilege, but voting is viewed as a right. And then the third question, just with regards to the counting, I know now in the 2024 election, there were challenges raised, and I don't think it stood the test much, but by political parties with regards to the counting and the system that was used. Can you maybe just take us through the system, the system that was used for the final count, and where was the system from? I mean, is it the South African IT system? From which country is it? You know, and who was the service provider? Thank you very much. And do you have confidence in the service provider? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Syed. Can I start with your last one? I have to admit I'm not too much aware of the service provider and the origins or developers of the systems. What I do know, however, is that our result systems is tested by auditors. In terms of the code that is used, I also believe that political parties at the national level are given access to check that the code actually works like it's supposed to work in terms of when it calculates the results. So in terms of that process at a national level does take place to verify and check that the system is actually working. Independent auditors check it. So from that particular standpoint, it is there and has been open and available. But I cannot unfortunately give you too much information because I'm not too queued up, unfortunately, Member Syed, on the actual system. But the system works and has been working in terms of how it's supposed to calculate the results which are captured across the country. Workplaces, we engage with the trade unions because that is something also that is raised, and obviously it is in terms of our legislation, and as for the unions to enforce that, no worker can be forced to work against their will, and that is something which has to be managed within the particular workplace. We make available, as I indicated earlier on, 2 days of special votes plus voting from 7 till 9 o'clock for persons. In some cases, persons choose to work because it's a public holiday and there is a benefit in terms of the remuneration they get. I understand 100% what you're saying in terms of that, around that, and that's why we engage primarily with the unions to ensure that they know that their members can assert their rights to participate, and nobody can be denied the opportunity to go and vote, or be forced to vote. To work during hours that they don't agree to work. So, but that is out and out something that is in the workplace that has to be regulated because different agreements with different employees may apply. We're not too sure with regard to that. Poor errors, yes, that is the bane of our life. We have a situation where, given the legacy of apartheid and also the current shortfalls, we have situations where the most vulnerable often have the worst situation in terms of, for example, voting stations. They are just places where there isn't no. Now, why that is, as you indicated, that is a responsibility on the state. Where we can, we will go to, for example, a church and ask the church for their building, whatever. So we don't only go to the state, but it is unfortunate we don't have, and the poorer people, the most vulnerable, are the ones who get this double, triple sort of hardship in terms of them being able to go out and vote. And yes, it's difficult. Look, we tried to look at, Mr. Sayed, a situation where we thought, what if we can have these prefabs? You know, those you get those prefabs that are sort of ready-made things. You go put them down and stuff like that. But their cost was just astronomical in terms of the, you know, we just couldn't afford to have. For example, one of the conditions is that you have to have a minimum of 30 days. You must use it now. We don't need that prefab for 30 days, et cetera, et cetera. So we have looked at ways in which we can make a little bit better for where we don't have permanent buildings up. When it comes to older persons, it's our rules that make sure that older persons will be assisted. And it's definitely, unfortunately, that you had in certain cases where agents used to complain and say, yes, but, or even voters, no, you mustn't let these old people come to the front, or you mustn't let this pregnant lady come to the front because she must queue as much as I'm queuing. And that's unfortunate situations. But from our side, we try and make sure that older folk, when they do come, obviously we encourage older people to come and do a special vote when there's not a lot of people, queues, etc. during the Monday, the Tuesday. We political parties also help in that regard, because they bring the older folk for a special vote before the time as well, and that is also great, you know, because ultimately it's the voter being assisted. So it is a challenge that we have, but largely our socioeconomic situation is such that, you know, as the IEC, we don't operate in this vacuum, and it's unfortunate that in some cases the voter experience is not you know, the same, and that is maybe a reflection also on the larger issues within our society. But thank you, Mr. Sayed. Yes, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Okay, Thomas, I see you've got a second bite of the cherry, and then I have Honourable Lacka and Honourable Kaiser-Philander. So Honourable Walters.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Can I also just say that I genuinely believe that if the system of voting, the system that we have, the actual checks and balances of the system we have, and the way it gets administered in the way that it's supposed to work, if we get that right, it's truly one of the best systems in the world. And it is something that, as a creation, I think we can all be proud of as South Africans. But the devil, of course, lies in implementation, how resources are allocated, and what I found interesting is that you touched on possibly some voting districts being too big. That's one way of looking at it. I would like to put something else on the table for your consideration. It's also not, call it, certainly from a systems theory point of view, of avoiding bottlenecks. And bottlenecks, of course, creates frustration. It creates unhappiness. It creates allegations. It creates pushes up the emotions. It also makes no sense, and I've seen certain instances of that where large voting districts have the same staff allocation as much smaller voting districts. So it's one way of doing it is trying to have a standard size of voting districts that are as small as possible, and they all, of course, have the same sort of basic staff allocation. Another way of looking at it is to make sure that the larger voting districts have staff commensurate with the size of the voters' roll. And that is, I sometimes think that some of the staff are fantastic. I think sometimes the cooperation and liaison with all the political parties are sometimes fantastic, and then also between the political parties are fantastic, but it boils down to, and look, it's not a difficult situation to resolve. It's X number of people arrive at a certain time in a certain place with too few people to manage it. That surely is not difficult. It's not something that's anecdotal. It's a very simple assessment that can be made of a staff component that is required given the size and the number of voters that's on a voter's roll. And I think that is look, I just think that is a simple exercise, and I really think I would like to hear what you have to say around that. I would also like to say that in my experience, the My fear is not so much cheating. My fear is not so much other political parties. I think generally there's a good spirit in South Africa around elections. Yes, there's incidents. Yes, there's emotion sometimes. But on the whole, I think I've had, in all kinds of settings, in all kinds of parts of the country, I've had positive experiences. But I'm more concerned about practice in the IEC. And there's one example that I want to raise with you. You talk of assessing staff members. Oldest trick that you pick up amongst IEC officials, that's virtually with every election that I've ever been involved in, I had to check, is the argument that I don't have objection forms. Now, the reason the staff members say they don't have objection forms is because they don't want people to fill it in, so that it doesn't get picked up by the IEC management and that they don't get performance managed out of the system. And I would like to, and it sounds like a fairly petty thing, but I've picked it up to the extent where I think this is the kind of informal advice that presiding officers and staff give to one another. And I would also like to suggest that there should be an instruction and a rule that the IEC in the morning, right up front, part of the auditing process of all the materials, there is in fact objection forms. And may I also tell you why I think it's important. It's not to put the IEC under pressure. It's actually to help the IEC with its performance assessment. It helps to avoid verbal altercations. In fact, the way an election should work is observers must be in a position, not being put deliberately in a corner far away from the process. They must be in a position to observe the entire process. They mustn't talk to the staff except for the presiding officer. They must not touch any materials. They mustn't argue with one another. They're not there to persuade one another. They should all direct concerns to a presiding officer. And if a presiding officer is willing and have those objection forms available, it's a very simple matter of the presiding officer making a ruling. You record the complaint, you record the ruling, and it allows, whether it's right or wrong, it to be audited afterwards. And I think there is a little bit of, call it a practice, an informal practice that I've picked up quite extensively. And that is also a suggestion from our side. And yeah, those are suggestions. I mean, by all means answer, but I think those are specific constructive suggestions that I'm making in terms of assisting you. Yes, and let me also thank you for your answers. I didn't get the impression that you are ducking and diving any of the questions. I have a good sense of where you are and what your challenges are. Those proposals of mine are made in the hopes that it actually helps to solve a lot of your frustrations if we can get those things right. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. And as I said, look, primarily you're sitting with a situation where you are you have staff that's going to come and work for you for 3 days at most, etc. So you need to work with it. So staff allocations, yes, we work on a staff. There is in fact a staff allocation process where we will, depending on the size of the voting district in terms of the numbers, you will actually get more staff. For example, with a voting center, similarly, when we have enforced streaming, there is additional staff available. The challenge happens when, in terms of giving effect to that. For example, we will have staff, and a lot of them, as you saw, are unemployed. Now the person gets a better offer a day before. Now we start running short of somebody that's been trained to do it. So again, yes. So we're looking at staff allocation and saying there is enough now. But do I have I got an allocation, but do I have enough people? Do I have enough of a buffer in terms of saying, look, so many people didn't pitch up here. Do I have enough people? So it comes down to whether I've been able to have enough people applying to work for the IEC, and remember, it is not just remember working for the IEC. You can have a lot of people applying who come from a particular area, but now they're not available anywhere else to go anywhere else because they're from that particular area. So it's about making sure that in terms of my recruitment, and that's why I said I need to go out and be able to cover all my areas, like for example the metro, all areas of the metro. But you'll find in certain areas that locals are not applying to work for for us, and then you have to say, okay, I must now move people across, and you run that. So staff allocation is it, but again, it's about the challenge of implementing and making sure you actually have enough of that staff available across the board as and when you are needed. Objection forms, I can tell you now, they have been now. Now again, it's a situation in one, and I hear you that at the start of the at the morning, 7 o'clock or whatever, just as much as we take the empty box and we show people, we will have to we have to tell the agents, and by the way, but the agents have to be present, that listen, there are objection forms there. Is in fact, there's nothing stopping a political party from using or issuing their own objection forms. Remember, this form is a statutory form. It's available, so there's nothing stopping you from saying, here's my own objection form I'm using. It's the same form. And also because again at the local level we have a situation where those things can be escalated, and the area manager can respond to any challenge from that, but it needs to be escalated at the local level to our local office. But yes, that Mr. Walters, just as with the ballot papers, you cannot say to me you don't have enough ballot papers at the station. There is enough given to every station has been allocated. That we have a form, sort of a recon form that simply says you've received so much, and you at the end of the day this is what I've used and received, etc. So they sign for these things. There is enough of these forms that is available for whether it's objections, whether it's appointment, agent appointment forms, etc. Those things are there, but nothing stops a party from saying, but listen, if you don't, here's an objection, I'm lodging my objection. But then follow up your local officers to follow officials to follow up with our local staff to say, at that station, I'm having a problem. Let's deal with it, because the only way in which we can respond to that is at that very local level. It's quicker to be able to respond to it. So yes, there are processes we need to make sure that we follow up to avoid the bottlenecks. There's a number of reasons why bottlenecks happen. Some of them are avoidable, unforeseeable, I accept. But where we can preempt it, by all means, we need to use the data that is available to us to actually determine where our pain points are, and preempt those particular pain points. But thank you for your suggestions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I've got the Honourable Lecker.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good afternoon, everybody. Chair, let me first welcome the presentation. But I think I've got quite a few issues that I would want to raise. First, what Honourable Walters has raised around the non-availability of objection forms. And I think I personally experienced that within the cluster of Athlone. One VD in Saviour and another one in Menenberg. That's what 35 and what 60. But I think what is more important would be IEC properly training the presiding officers as well as the deputy presiding officers, because for many a times when there are objections raised, we've received complaints that presiding officers are threatening the party agents that they are going to call the police on them if they insist on wanting to understand exactly what is happening. So as a result, the case in Saviour Ward 60, the party agent wants to pursue it further. So I think as a matter of not having full information or properly trained, they use a defense mechanism of threatening party agents. And I think it has to do with the fact that once you question their ability to perform their duties properly, they feel that they are being undermined. And I think it's very important that we get party agents that are properly trained. And for all these years, we had principals, deputy principals, or teachers, and they understood exactly what needs to be done. But the 2024 elections had its own challenges. So I really want to put an emphasis on proper training on the IEC staff. Then the second issue that I think I might have, it starts with a question as to what is the future of the Section 24. I'm raising this because there were people who applied to vote outside of their voting district. Those people, we had the reports that their application was accepted, but on the day that they were supposed to go and vote, their names were not even recorded. So I want to know what is the future of the Section 24A, because in my understanding, that was meant to avoid ballot papers running out because people are coming from a particular VD to vote elsewhere. For instance, if I happen to be working in town and I'm supposed to be voting in Nyanga East, and I'm working in town, it's the national elections. I understand that it's not like the local government elections where I had to vote for a ward, but it's the national elections. But when they get there, their names are not there. So what's the use of having that if there's going to be technical glitches? Now, if those technical glitches were as a result of a system that is new, which has its own challenges, as any system that is being tested, I want to know, are we going to continue even though there were such issues? Because I remember going to the a welcome office or Rylands IEC office to raise this specific issue of people who have received an okay report to say they can vote wherever they are applying to vote because it is outside of their normal voting district. So I think the Section 24A for me is a key thing because that's where people lose votes. And also the proper training of IEC staff, which is something that leaves a lot to be desired. Lastly, I'm not sure what is the best practice with IEC staff counting the votes when party agents can't even see that particular counting process. They are sitting far from where they are doing what they are supposed to be doing. It's just a practice that I found it very strange, funny, and painful for me to experience in 2024 because it has never happened before. So those are the issues that I think I wanted to raise, and maybe a conversation of this nature needs to happen regularly as we are approaching 2026 local government elections. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks.
Thank you very much. So thank you. Yeah, the presiding officer training, I think we have spoken about that, and we will continue with our efforts to ensure. I think the challenge is, and thank you, member, I think you also mentioned party agent. I think all the role players in the station must be adequately trained, as is the observers, for example, as well, so that everybody understands their roles, what is there, what needs to happen in terms of this. It's a two-way situation. You know, many cases we investigate and we get a different version of what happens at the voting station. So it's always very difficult to assume that you know, that it's only from one side. We try and investigate these particular matters and intervene if necessary around, for example, especially around agent complaints and what has happened, because then you'll have sort of, sometimes you have unfortunately two contrasting versions, and or the policeman will come in and say, actually this is what happened and stuff like that. So yeah, but nonetheless, those are things that we want to avoid. I think it's important, for example, that agents, if you know your agents and your agents can introduce themselves even at the, you know, generally members special vote days is relatively quiet. That's when you should be able to have your agents who are going to be working at that station with your presiding officers, and they get to know each other and understand, and the rules are explained, etc. Because you actually have 2 days prior to the election day when that voting station is open. That's when you are there. That's when you have your checks and you have your conversations about what is the objection process, what is happening in terms of the forms that is available, etc. Where are you going to be a station? You must also remember that in this election, for example, there were 52 parties parties, we cannot always accommodate everybody in a voting station. So we hopefully try and accommodate by rotating some cases, etc., etc. But those are things that it can only work if there's a mutual working relationship amongst all the role players. The 24A, yeah, what happened is that the 24A lists were also printed and distributed to the voting station so that they can know to expect those particular voters. Where it's now unfortunate. I hear you mention these examples, but it's unfortunate I cannot comment on specific incidents where this happened. But until the legislation is changed by Parliament, Section 24A will be there. It will be regulated, and it's just about making sure that the process that we have in place is improved for 2029. So that we can have, in the next round of the NPE, we can look at how those processes. I'm sure between now and then there will be a lot of developments at the national level in terms of maybe legislation, etc., etc. So, but yes, we must always aim to learn from where it happens, and we can improve overall. I think that is the challenge that we have, is always to improve. Again, remember, in terms of your counting, where agents are not present, again, that was not the standard across the province. If it did happen, it should not be happening. Agents are clearly part of the process. They must be able to be close enough to observe the processes, but not too close in order to touch or pick up or be part of the actual counting. But there is something that has to be managed. And again, it's unfortunate if there were incidences where agents were told to move to the one side, and that is not how it must be managed. Generally, as I said, over the 3 days, there should be a relationship built on between agents and our teams, so that they work together ultimately in terms of these particular processes. So, if it did occur, those incidents, it would be unfortunate that such happens, because our training is very clear in terms of where agents should be, and that they're entitled to observe the process, and that they should and be able to be allowed to raise objections, which are then generally dealt with at the station there and there, and to have it recorded in the event that there's further issues later on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And then the final question, because you've been here with us for quite a while, is from the Honourable Wendy Kaiser-Philander.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Chairperson. I will be very quick. Chair, I am covered in terms of the recruitment process and the perception of unemployed versus professionals. Thank you very much, Mr. Hendrikse, for outlining that process. Chair, a lot of the issues raised today, I think Mr. Hendrikse has got almost an answer for any issue that was raised. That also tells me in the sense that a lot of these issues has been coming election after elections. What will make 2026 different? We know where the overpopulation, if I can call it for the lack of a better word, in terms of voters are. I understand the demarcation process, but what is the IEC doing from their side, as of NPE 2024? Contingency plans in place to make sure that those issues that was raised, and as I mentioned, that has been coming for years and years, does not reoccur. Of course, it won't be smooth sailing. There will always be a hiccup or so, but those common practices and issues, what are the processes in place? What are the contingency plans going forward? And how does that get addressed before we get to the next elections? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Member. If it seems like I've got answers or responses, it's because also remember that we have I've already engaged with, we've had a review session with all the contestants, not only the parties represented in the Provincial PLC, which are all currently also in your legislature, where we engage with the political parties on these particular issues. So if it does sound, members, that I'm responding too quickly, it's because your members wearing a different cap necessarily have also raised these particular things, and we have responded to them at that particular level as well. So yes, that is why it may seem that I have a response, but sometimes, remember, the same issue arises, but from a different cause. If I don't make myself, so things may happen and a queue happens, but it's not because of something that happened previously. It's now a new, different phenomena that appeared, or whatever the case may be. So, but it's something that we, as a professional organization, which is the IEC, needs to be able to manage, and that's our responsibility. We cannot duck and dive from that particular responsibility on that. Contingency plans, as I also indicated to member Walters early on. At this stage, I can't tell you what my contingency is until I've actually worked out the strategy for getting into LGE and preparations. We have a little bit of time now, and as I said, it is a national organization. What I need to look at is from my own perspective in terms of this province, and say, what are some of the things that we can look at and say, starting with as I said already, voting district redelimitation. What are the areas that we can look at and maybe split those voting districts? What are some of the issues around staff recruitment, how we can reach out better, whether it is through our education department. I mean, member Lecker did also refer to the use of teachers and its principals, etc. So those are engagements which I have to have with the responsible officials, etc. I mentioned the fact of even in terms of with organized business. Is it possible that organized business can encourage their staff, who are qualified members of staff, to make themselves available, and to encourage them to actually say, but listen, it's okay if you take off, from the business. Will encourage them in particular ways to say, okay, no, go work for the IEC for that couple of days, and that'll be great. So it's part and parcel of looking a little bit out of the box in terms of how we recruit and how we also train. So there are challenges, but we obviously can't do this on its own. And I appreciate the engagement that I have with members, because yes, you have experiences which you need to relay to me, but can I also ask members, and I'm sure you do already, but where you have the opportunity to engage with your PLC reps as well, especially on particular local situation that happened, so that they can raise it at that particular PLC level, and there can be a response at the local level for a particular local situation that happened. I would appreciate that you work also in that regard, so that it's not just waiting when I have a session with honorable members, and then you raise and I answer and stuff like that. So that will also help, because we have existing statutory structures like the PLCs already in place. So I'd appreciate also if members can maybe direct some of their particular station issues or area issues, so that we can deal with it in that particular way on a consistent manner as well. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Honourable Councillor Philander, have you got a follow up there?
Yes, please, Chair. Quick one. Chairperson, I hear Mr. Hendricks speaking about a lot of talks that needs to take place. My question would just be, is there a timeline set for that talks? If not at the moment, at what point, in anticipation of the next election, do timeline get drafted? Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Hendricks?
Hello, thank you very much. Yes, as I indicated, these are things that I have to engage with certain role players, and it depends on their availability as well as how we approach it. But also, members, remember overall in terms of the national, the overall sort of plan towards NPE that is developed not only by me, but as a national organization. The IEC will be obviously now that we part and parcel of our review process, but also as our planning process as a national organization, we will be setting out our path line in terms of that, because a lot of the interventions which I need to do has to come obviously as part of a national overall national strategy as well. So this is where we are now. We just a couple of months after the election. We are going through the process of engaging, of reviewing, and then having to then come up with the plans. As I indicate, I wouldn't want to put up a date here and say I'm going to have a plan by that date, because to a certain extent it may be not completely within my own hands, but we certainly will be working towards that. And at another later occasion, I can come back to the committee and indicate where we are with that as well.
Great. Thank you very much. Mr. Hendricks, thank you very, very much. I think we really appreciate it. Was a very, very good engagement. And we understand that obviously you couldn't comment on individual matters. But I think we very much appreciate you having been here. And yes, we have the slides. Thank you very much. And I think on behalf of everybody on the Standing Committee, we really appreciate your time and commitment to this, and the very difficult job that you have, particularly on actual E-days, where everything that can go wrong must sometimes feel like it does go. So we really do appreciate your presence.
Can I also just again express my appreciation to the members? Sorry for keeping you on a Friday so late, members. But yeah, but I really appreciate the engagement and the positive note in which we are engaging on a topic which is, I think, close to all of our hearts in terms of our electoral democracy and the challenges we face as a country and going forward as well. So from my side, I certainly do appreciate the opportunity to engage with the committee.
Thank you very, very much. And you're in our excuse, but the members, I'm going to ask them to stay on for a few minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Okay then.
Thank you very much. Okay, members, the only people standing between ourselves and our weekend is ourselves. We just need to quickly run through a couple of the more prosaic issues to do with the committee. We need to consider and hopefully adopt, the draft committee meeting minutes of the 23rd of August 2024. I am hoping that everybody has seen them, and I believe, Mr. Procedural Officer, that they have been circulated. Okay.
Sorry, yes, Chair. I minimized the screen where I could my mic for my mic. Yes, but what Ms. Ahmad did, Kamsh Ahmad did distribute it.
Fantastic. Could I please have a proposer and a seconder, unless there are any issues that people want to raise? The sooner you put your hands up, the sooner we can all go. Okay, Honourable Kaiser Philander has proposed, and a seconder?
I second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's done. That's great, making good progress. Then just in terms of resolutions, I do have a resolution I want to propose, but I just want to ask if there is anybody else who wants to bring a resolution at this point. Honourable Walters.
Chair, I'm not sure whether I am jumping the gun in terms of what you are proposing, but I would suggest that we have regular interactions in as far as the program allows with the IEC. I appreciate the fact that the gentleman could not necessarily give us the kind of assurances that we wanted. But I do think I'm not entirely satisfied with, call it, the fact that he seems to think some of the matters, particularly what I raised and what Member Lecker raised, that those are anecdotal, localized issues. I actually think that it is broader, the issue of things like objection forms and so I do think there should be regular interactions. I do think part of what we need to explore is bottlenecks, how to avoid bottlenecks in the system, with particular reference to the size of voters' rolls and whether it's adequately staffed to ensure that there are not bottlenecks in the system. And I do believe that they are, I didn't get the sense that they are cracking down on some of the informal practices that you pick up within the IEC. And I would like to stress, I'm not, when I say this is what I've experienced. It's not one election or one incident at a voting district. I've experienced it enough in numerous elections to pick up when it is in fact a practice. There are things that are needed to avoid tension and the kind of situation that myself and Member Lekker referred to, that actually avoids frustrations. You know, there should be objection forms. It should be immediately available. It should be part of the early morning audit. If people have a problem, they should fill it in. The presiding officer must make a ruling. So I think there are informal practices that IEC staff engage in to avoid accountability, because they want to have that job in the future again, and they don't want to look bad. And so they don't. If you don't have objection forms, then you don't have objections. I think he clearly didn't understand my question. I didn't say that the ballot. It was an issue around ballots. The issue is around staff allocation. It used to be an issue around ballots until they changed the registration legislation in the last election. The fact is there are bottlenecks. The fact is it's because some voting districts are understaffed. The fact is that some of the people are not skilled enough. And the fact is that there are practices, informal practices amongst the IEC staff that might not be referring to political bias, but it's certainly to avoid accountability and fair accountability. And if they don't grapple with those issues right up front, they're actually creating, as the South Afrikaans, a lat vir hulle eie agtersteewe. That's the kind of bottlenecks, push up frustrations, and create unnecessary questions around the legitimacy of elections. So I hope that was clear enough. Bottlenecks specifically, and potentially harmful informal practices amongst IEC staff, I think are specific matters we need to look into. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Honourable Lekker, do you want to agree with that? Do you want to add to that? Was a separate proposal?
I fully agree with it, but I'm not gonna raise that now. I just want to check, Chairperson. Is it possible to get a roadmap towards outreach programs that are conducted by IEC staff, so that we can also in our communities be able to mobilize to assist IEC? That's one. Two, Chair, would be around the, maybe part of what Member Philander asked, the ongoing overpopulation of people in our communities, and some of them are not registered. What is IEC's plan in tackling that? Because you would have noted, Chair, particularly in the poor communities, many people did not vote because they were not registered in those areas. So I think there is a need, in as much as 1994 was a different animal, but there is a need for a full swing voter registration conducted by IEC and not by political parties this time, because the fact is, statistics report has indicated that communities have grown more than what they were. Typical example would be that Khayelitsha alone, there were plus minus 600,000 people who were not registered or who were not counted in the previous IEC report. Now we had a report of IEC and those people were new in those areas. So those are some of the things that I think they need to be tackled. West Coast is not as it was before the current statistics report. So I'm raising this because there is a growing concern of communities becoming bigger and bigger, and political parties can only do so much. So what is IEC's plan in regards to that? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So could I possibly rephrase, I think, what we've all got here as the committee resolves that we will have regular interactions with the IEC for them to update the standing committee on their progress in terms of their mandate, and that we also request a schedule of the IEC's outreach activities and programs in their efforts to educate peoples of the Western Cape on how to exercise their rights. Would we have somebody to second that?
I'm happy to second that.
Okay, great. Honourable Van Wyk, thank you very much.
Chair,
Yes, yes.
I've got a slight different amendment.
Right.
About voter registration.
Okay.
You only mentioned voter education. I wanted to understand if it's possible for them to look into it, noting that 1994 was a different animal where IEC literally employed people to do voter registration.
I think we can add your education efforts to educate and register the peoples of the Western Cape. How does that sound? Okay.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, great. We will then do that. Okay, are there any other hands? I see Honourable Walters.
Sorry, Chair, there's just my specific point was around bottlenecks on election day. And maybe perhaps under the first point, to also assist, include regular interactions with the IEC for them to update the committee in terms of their mandate and their efforts to avoid administrative bottlenecks or logistic bottlenecks. Sorry.
Logistic, yeah, I think logistic is a good word.
Bottlenecks. Delaying voting for voters.
Okay, yeah. Okay, is everyone happy? No one says they aren't happy, so I'm going to take that as an assent. Okay, are there any other issues? No. Okay, right. I think that brings the meeting to an end. We can then adjourn. Thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy your weekend. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair.